you're watching this, you're probably a growth-oriented individual. And that probably means that you are surrounded by other growth-oriented individuals. And we growth-oriented individuals, we are in the breakthrough business. We want breakthroughs. When we get to the other side of something and it feels different in a substantive, dramatic way, it's how we know we've grown. And so that means you've probably had experiences like this. A friend comes to you and says, "Oh my God, I had this huge breakthrough I have to tell you about. You know how my partner and I are always fighting? Well, I realized in this fight that we were just having last night that I've been projecting all my father stuff onto him. And my father needed me to take care of him. He should have been taking care of me. And I have all this resentment I didn't even realize I had. And so I always assume my partner's trying to get me to take care of him even when he's not. And I'm projecting that stuff onto him, and that's why we fight." And so they tell you about this breakthrough, and they're really excited about it because things are going to be different now. They're not going to fight about that stuff anymore. And it's true, it works. They don't fight about that stuff. They have a really good, solid week of not fighting about that stuff before the fights resume. Or maybe you have a friend who goes to a weekend workshop, and they come back and they say, "I went to this workshop and I had this huge breakthrough. And I realized that I can just be myself. I can be much more vulnerable than I ever let myself be. Like, I always care so much about what other people think, and I'm trying to get their approval, and I just can see now that I've been doing that all this time, and I don't want to do it anymore. And I just had this experience of what it's like to just really be myself and be vulnerable, and just let people judge me if they want to and think what they think." And they tell you about this breakthrough, and they're so excited about it because of how different they're going to be able to be as a result, and they really get to enjoy that difference for the next few days before they revert to their exact same behavior of always trying to gain everybody's approval. I mean, what's going on here? Is it like there's some kind of epidemic of breakthrough amnesia? Like people have these breakthroughs and somehow something just enters their brain and wipes them out? Maybe you yourself have been the victim of breakthrough amnesia. Well, it turns out these are not actually breakthroughs that are happening. In fact, these people are having huge peek-throughs. It's a peek-through, meaning they haven't gotten to the other side of something at all, but they have glimpsed what it will be like when they do get to the other side. They've had a momentary experience of being in a different state than they're normally in, and that is a peek-through. Peek-throughs are really important to have because having the peek-through allows you to know what it is that you're aiming for, where it is that you're headed as you grow. But integrating those peek-through experiences is what allows people to actually have breakthroughs and actually grow. So one thing that you can always do to tell the difference between a peek-through and a breakthrough is that peek-throughs tend to have this characteristic of, I had a realization, I saw something, I had an insight. It's like a new piece of knowledge has arisen. And that new piece of knowledge is a wonderful thing to have, but it's never enough. Knowledge is not integrated yet into the ecology of your life. And so there are a number of things that you can do to integrate that. So if we take the case of the person who has the breakthrough about projecting all their dad stuff onto their partner, well, they're going to forget all of that. Whatever breakthrough they had, they're going to forget. And so it's really good for you or them to realize that they've got to do something really fast to make sure they don't forget it. They've got to set up some structure in their life that will remind them. So a great example of this could be that they give their partner a free projection card that they can pull out at any time in the middle of an argument. Okay, anytime I'm arguing with you, you pull out the projection card and you say, "You know what, you're doing that projection thing again." And as soon as that happens, we stop the argument and the partner pretends to be dad and says, "Okay, I'm your father now. Tell your father everything you wanted him to hear." And now instead of my projecting all this stuff on my partner, I'm just talking directly to my dad. And I'm starting to work through this stuff that I haven't actually worked through, even though I've seen that it needs to be worked through. And my partner can help me with this. One thing that is often necessary, in addition to creating a structure so that you'll remember it, and also a structure so that you'll have a chance to keep practicing this new way of being, is that sometimes people need to have some kind of emotional release that goes along with the insight or the realization. So the reason I'm projecting all this stuff about my father on you is because I have all this unresolved stuff I need to work out. And so part of the way to work that out is to get in touch with my anger at my father, which if I get angry enough, it'll stir things up, and then I'll be able to feel the underlying sadness that's been there all along and cry about it, and it will integrate at a deeper level. So besides just having an insight and a realization, I need to structure some structure in my life that allows me to remember that I had the insight. that allows me to have a new practice so that I can get better at it, and that may give me a chance to move through it on an emotional level, not just on the level of knowledge. If we take the example of the person who came back from the workshop, and they had this opportunity to be vulnerable in a way that they've never been before. Well, what they need to do is, in order to integrate that new experience, they've got to think about what were all the circumstances that allowed them to enter this state that they don't normally get to enter. Hopefully they've taken notes, or they can reconstruct some notes afterwards, and they can remember what allowed them to enter this unusual way of being, so that then they can get together with a friend after the workshop and they can try to recreate those circumstances together. Let's do the same practices that we did in the workshop, and I'll come into this vulnerable space again, and I'll get to remember what it feels like because I've already forgotten it and it's only a week later, and then I'll get to get another experience of this new state. So you get to practice by analyzing the conditions which allowed you to have the peek through in the first place, and then trying to reproduce those conditions. In fact, this is a phenomenon that I often call learning to be the workshop. There are these 3 stages that people go through when they have these realizations in workshops. And the first is that a workshop facilitator or an exercise allows them to enter a state that they cannot enter on their own. They have to be guided into it. And that's the first stage. In the second stage, they've been able to go through that enough times that they remember, and they can have kind of an internal facilitator, and they can go through that process inside themselves. So I could say, well, I want to be vulnerable like that again. So I'm going into work, which is one of the places where I'm most worried about getting people's approval. So I'm going to go through this little exercise in my head while I'm sitting in the parking lot before I get out of my car and go into work. And then I'm going to try to reproduce it on my own, and I'm going to practice that. And that's the second stage, internalizing the workshop so I can have the experience by myself. And the third stage is being able to be the workshop, which means I produce it for other people. Instead of just having it inside myself, I can lead other people through the same exercise, create the set of conditions that allows other people to be vulnerable in the way that I wish to be able to be vulnerable. Then we can all be vulnerable together, which will make it a lot easier for me to be able to be vulnerable, and it integrates into my life more fully. Because not only have I gotten to have the experience, I've gotten to practice it, internalize it, and then help other people to have the experience. That is a breakthrough. By the time I can be the workshop, I'm different. I've integrated something, and I know something about vulnerability and not needing approval that I didn't know before. So, it is wonderful to have peek-throughs. And so the next time you have one, see if you can recognize that that's what it was. And come home and tell your friends, oh my God, I had this huge peek-through. And here's what I saw. And here's what I realized. And now I get to go through the process of integrating that change into my life. And I'd like you to help me.